A bakery worker sees four abandoned children in front of his bakery, but when he gets closer he sees.
Hello everyone, enjoy these relaxing moments while you watch.
The bakery, Dulce Esperanza, was located in a small town in Vermont. In winter, the town was blanketed in white snow. It was a cold morning like so many others, but for Michael, it was the beginning of a story he had never imagined. Michael, a man about 35 years old, had owned the bakery since his mother passed away. Dulce Esperanza was not just his workplace, it was a place where he poured all his memories and love for his mother. He opened the bakery every morning, always greeting customers with a kind smile, even though he often felt lonely inside. This morning, as usual, Michael stepped outside to shovel the snow in front of the bakery. However, right at the doorstep, he froze when he saw a large cardboard box. "What's this?" Michael murmured, frowning. The box looked old and worn, with one corner torn. Michael bent down to check it, and as he lifted the lid, he was stunned by what he saw. Inside were four children, shivering from the cold. The youngest, perhaps just over a year old, was curled up in a thin blanket. The other three, around 2 to 5 years old, huddled close together. Their eyes, filled with fear, stared at Michael as though he were a threat. "Dios mío," Michael exclaimed, his heart pounding. "What are you doing here?" Michael crouched down and gently extended his hand. The oldest girl, probably around 5 years old, immediately shrank back, her eyes panicked. "Don't be afraid. I won't hurt you," Michael said in the gentlest tone he could muster. Without hesitation, he carried each child into the bakery. The warm air inside brought a faint pink flush to their pale faces. Michael quickly fetched blankets from the back room and wrapped each child snugly. He prepared warm cups of milk and some small pastries, setting them on the table. "Are you hungry?" "Have a little something," Michael said, handing the cup to the oldest girl. After a moment's hesitation, she took it but kept her eyes fixed on the window. Michael sat down across from them, a mix of worry and anger in his heart. Who could abandon these children on such a cold morning? He looked closely at them. Each wore old, worn coats, but what caught his attention most was a small symbol on their clothing, a triangle with an unfamiliar letter inside. "What's this?" Michael muttered, touching the symbol on one of the children's jackets. But as soon as he did, the oldest girl screamed, "Don't! Don't touch it! They'll come!" Michael jumped back, startled. "Who? Who are you talking about?" he asked, but the girl just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Michael took a deep breath to calm himself. He couldn't afford to panic. Instead, he decided to check outside. As he stepped out, the biting wind felt colder than ever. But there was no one around, just the white snow covering the ground and the tightly shut houses. The town seemed as peaceful as ever in the morning, but Michael sensed an unusual unease. He went back into the bakery and called his close friend Isabel, who worked at the police department. The call rang a few times before Isabel answered. "Michael, what's going on? Why are you calling so early?" "Isabel, I need you to come here right away." "Something serious has happened," Michael said, his voice betraying his tension. "What exactly is it?" Isabel asked. "4 children. I found them in a box outside the bakery this morning. They're terrified and have strange symbols on their clothes." "Symbols? What kind of symbols?" Isabel asked, her tone now serious. "I'm not sure, but I think it's connected to some kind of organization. Can you come over now?" "I'll be there right away," Isabel replied quickly before hanging up. Michael exhaled deeply, but just then, the oldest girl's eyes fixed on the window again. "Mister, they're coming." "What?" Michael turned to look out the window but saw no one. Still, a chilling feeling down his spine told him not to ignore her words. A short while later, Isabel arrived. She was a woman around 30, with short hair and sharp eyes. "Michael, where are the kids?" she asked as soon as she walked in. Over there, Michael pointed to the corner of the room where the children sat huddled together. Isabel walked over, inspecting each child and the symbols on their clothes. We need to talk immediately, Michael. I think I know what this is. Isabel closely examined the symbols on the children's clothing. Her face grew serious. Michael, do you recognize this symbol? She asked, lowering her voice so as not to frighten the children further. Michael shook his head. It looks familiar, but I can't pinpoint it. Do you know anything? Isabel nodded slightly. This symbol. I've seen it in a report about a cross-border child trafficking ring. But I'll need to investigate further to confirm. She crouched down, looking into the frightened eyes of the oldest girl. Sweetheart, do you remember anything about where you came from? Who brought you here? The girl trembled, avoiding Isabel's gaze. After a while, she whispered, I don't know. They told us to stay quiet, or else. Her voice broke, and tears streamed down her cheeks. Michael knelt beside Isabel, placing a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. It's okay, sweetheart. No one can hurt you here. I'll protect you. We need to investigate this immediately, Isabel said, standing up and making a call to her colleagues. I'll report this case. But Michael, if this really involves a criminal organization, they won't give up easily. You need to be extremely careful. Michael clenched his fists, looking at the children. I can't let them go back to those people. They're innocent kids. Isabel nodded. You did the right thing by calling me. But listen, if anything unusual happens, you must report it immediately. These people are not just dangerous, they'll do anything to cover up their crimes. Michael fell silent, the unease in his heart growing stronger. But before he could say anything more, the sound of the doorbell startled both of them. Michael turned to see a man step inside. He was tall, polished, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit, and his hair was slicked back neatly. It was James. Michael immediately recognized him from the stories he had heard. Buenos dias, James said smoothly, his voice confident and velvety. May I come in? Michael reluctantly nodded, trying to keep calm. Hello. How can I help you? James smiled faintly and stepped inside, his gaze sweeping across the bakery slowly. I heard your bakery is quite famous in town. I'm here on business and thought I'd try your renowned pastries. Michael made an effort to keep his voice steady. We're always happy to serve customers. What kind of pastry would you like to try? James didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes lingered on the corner of the room where the children were huddled together. Michael quickly stepped forward, blocking his line of sight, trying to conceal their presence. Just some kids belonging to a customer, Michael said quickly, attempting to sound casual. They're waiting for their parents to pick them up. Really? James smirked, his eyes still scrutinizing the room. This town is so peaceful. I like the atmosphere here. Oh, I'll try your apple pie. I hear it's your specialty. Michael nodded and went into the kitchen to get the pie, but his mind raced with questions. He knew James wasn't here just to buy pastries. The way he looked at the children, the calculated manner of his every move, it all signaled impending danger. Meanwhile, Isabel watched James from behind the counter. She didn't say anything, but Michael knew she was analyzing every gesture the man made. When Michael returned with the pie, James's demeanor had shifted. He stepped closer, his gaze turning cold and sharp. Listen, Michael, James said quietly, but his icy tone sent shivers down Michael's spine. I think you understand that there are things you shouldn't interfere with. Be careful. Michael clenched his fists but didn't react. He didn't want James to see that he was worried. I don't understand what you're talking about, he replied. James smirked. Good. I hope there won't be any misunderstandings. He took the apple pie and turned to leave, but before stepping out the door, James glanced back at Michael one last time. Have a nice day, Michael. The door closed, but the tension in the room lingered. Michael turned to Isabel. What do you think of him? Very dangerous, Isabel said. James isn't someone we can take lightly. I'll look into him further, but you need to be extremely careful, Michael. If they find out you're protecting the children, you'll become their target. Michael sighed. I don't care what they do to me. I just want to make sure the kids are safe. Isabel looked at Michael seriously. You're a good man, Michael. But don't act alone. I'll do everything I can to help you, but we need a concrete plan. Michael nodded, but he knew in his heart that things wouldn't be simple. After Isabel left, he went back to the children. The oldest girl, Lucy, looked at him with tearful eyes. Mister, he's a bad man. Don't let him take us. Michael sat down beside Lucy and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. I won't let that happen. I promise. Lucy remained silent, but Michael could still see the fear in her eyes. He knew that keeping this promise wouldn't be easy, especially with someone as dangerous as James involved. After James left, Michael felt the weight of pressure bearing down on him. His small bakery, once a place of peace and comfort, had now become the center of an unpredictable danger. He looked out the window, where James's footprints were etched into the snow, leading to a sleek black car parked at the end of the street. The car didn't move, as if it were waiting for something. Michael took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He turned back and saw Lucy still sitting huddled up, her gaze fixed on the window. The three younger children seemed exhausted, fast asleep on the couch, wrapped in the warm blankets he had brought out. Michael sat down next to Lucy. Do you know who he is? He asked softly. Lucy nodded slightly, her eyes red and swollen. He's one of the people who took us. I don't know his name, but he and the others always yelled at us. They said if we didn't listen, we wouldn't get to eat. A wave of anger surged through Michael, but he kept his voice calm. Do you remember anything about the place? Was it a house or somewhere else? Lucy trembled, hugging herself tightly. It wasn't a house. Just a big, cold room. I don't want to remember anymore. Tears spilled down her cheeks again, and Michael felt his heart ache. All right, sweetheart. We won't talk about it anymore. But I promise you, no one will hurt you again, Michael said, gently brushing her hair. Lucy looked up at him. You won't let him take us, will you? Michael looked into her eyes, his own filled with determination. No. I won't let that happen. I promise. Michael tried to keep himself busy by tidying up the bakery, but his mind couldn't stop racing. Isabel had promised to send more information about James, but Michael knew she couldn't intervene openly without sufficient evidence. That afternoon, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was an older woman, Mrs. Rosa, a regular customer at the bakery. Mrs. Rosa always brought a cheerful atmosphere with her lively chatter and warm smile. Michael. It's so cold today, isn't it? Do you have any apple pie? My grandkids love it, Mrs. Rosa said, her eyes twinkling. Michael forced a smile, but Mrs. Rosa's eyes quickly noticed the corner of the room where the children were still sitting. Oh, whose kids are those, Michael? They're adorable, she asked, her eyes lighting up. Michael hesitated for a moment. He couldn't tell the truth, but he didn't want to lie either. They're the kids of a friend. She had an emergency and asked me to look after them, he replied, trying to sound casual. Well, that's kind of you, Mrs. Rosa said with a smile as she picked out her pastries. Before leaving, she paused for a moment, giving Michael a curious look. Michael, I don't know what's going on, but if you need help, don't hesitate to ask. Michael smiled, grateful for Mrs. Rosa's concern. Thank you, but I'm fine. Take care on your way home. When the door closed behind her, Michael exhaled deeply. He didn't want anyone in the town to get involved in this situation. But he also knew James's appearance was no coincidence, and the risk of the children being discovered was growing by the minute. That night, Michael decided to move the children to the small upstairs room he usually used for storage. He rearranged the space, laying out mattresses and blankets to create a temporary, cozy sleeping area. Once everything was ready, he sat down next to Lucy, who was still awake. "Lucy, I need you to do something for me," Michael said, his voice calm and reassuring. "If any strangers come near the bakery, you must promise me you won't go outside. Can you do that?" Lucy nodded, but her eyes remained filled with worry. "Mister, will they find us?" Michael smiled, though he didn't feel confident inside. "No. I'll protect you, Lucy. You just have to trust me." Lucy stayed silent but eventually lay down, clutching the blanket tightly. Michael stayed by her side for a long time, watching the children sleep. He knew he couldn't just sit by. He had to find a way to protect them, even if it meant facing James head-on. The next morning, Michael opened the bakery as usual. But this time, he noticed a strange car parked a short distance away. Two men sat inside but didn't get out, as if they were watching. Michael felt a wave of tension but tried not to let it show. He continued working, serving customers as he did every day. But his eyes kept darting toward the car. The night before, Isabel had warned him that James might send someone to watch him. And now Michael knew her warning had come true. As the morning wore on, the car remained stationary. Michael couldn't take it any longer. He decided to call Isabel. "Isabel, they're watching me," he said over the phone, his voice strained. "I expected this," Isabel replied. "You need to be very careful, Michael. I'll send someone to investigate the car, but you can't do anything reckless." Michael felt powerless, but he knew he couldn't ignore the situation. He returned to the bakery, his eyes filled with resolve. No matter what, he wouldn't let the children fall into the wrong hands. That evening, after closing the bakery, Michael cleaned up the tables and double-checked the locks to ensure everything was secure. The children had finished the simple dinner he had prepared: warm soup and some bread. Upstairs, they were settled into the temporary sleeping arrangement, but Lucy was still sitting by the window, quietly gazing into the night. Michael walked in, carrying a blanket. He gently draped it over Lucy's shoulders. "You should get some rest, sweetheart. You'll need to wake up early tomorrow," he said, his tone soft and warm. Lucy shook her head, her eyes fixed on the darkness outside. "I'm scared. They'll come. They always find us." Michael sat down beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to worry. I'll do everything I can to protect you. Do you trust me?" Lucy nodded slightly, but the fear in her eyes lingered. "Mr. Michael, if they find us, they'll hurt you. I don't want that." Michael smiled, his expression filled with reassurance. "I'm an adult, sweetheart. I know how to handle this. You just need to sleep well and leave the rest to me, okay?" Finally, Lucy lay down, though Michael knew she wasn't entirely at ease. He sighed and went back downstairs. His mind was overwhelmed with worry about James and his accomplices lurking in the shadows. The strange car had been parked near the bakery all day, and Michael knew they wouldn't stop until they achieved their goal. Michael poured himself a cup of coffee, sat at the table, and picked up his phone. He dialed Isabel's number. "This is Isabel." "What's going on, Michael?" Isabel answered immediately, her voice filled with concern. "They're still hanging around," Michael said, his eyes fixed on the window. "I don't think they'll leave anytime soon. I need to know more about James. I can't just sit here and wait for something bad to happen. I'm working with the investigation team, but we need time," Isabel said, her tone firm. "Michael, you have to understand that if James finds out you're hiding the children, he won't hesitate to do whatever it takes to get them back. Don't act recklessly." Michael was silent for a moment. He didn't want Isabel to worry, but the helplessness he felt was unbearable. "I won't let anything happen to the kids," he said with determination. "All right. I'll try to speed things up on my end. But remember, you don't have to do this alone. If you need anything, call me immediately." Michael nodded, even though Isabel couldn't see it. "Thank you, Isabel." After hanging up, Michael sat in the dark, his thoughts racing. He looked up at the staircase leading to the room where the children were sleeping. They had already endured too much pain and fear. Michael swore to himself that he wouldn't let anyone hurt them again. The next morning, when Michael opened the bakery, he noticed the strange car was gone. However, the sense of unease didn't fade. Michael knew this temporary calm wouldn't last. He carried on with his daily routine, trying not to attract attention. The first customer of the day was Edward, a middle-aged mailman. Edward was a cheerful man who always brought a relaxed atmosphere whenever he stopped by. "Buenos dias, Michael." Edward greeted, pulling off his snow-covered beanie and placing it on the counter. "What's special on the menu today?" Michael smiled, masking his worry. "Apple pie is still our best seller. Want to try some?" "Of course. But today, I'll take 2 slices, one for me and one for my grumpy wife at home," Edward laughed heartily. Michael prepared the pie for Edward, but when he turned back to the counter, Edward had noticed the small pairs of shoes neatly placed in the corner of the room. "Michael, you've got some little guests. Who are they?" Edward asked curiously. Michael froze for a moment but quickly regained his composure. "Oh, they're the kids of a friend. I'm watching them for a few days." Edward looked at him, his eyes seeming to want to ask more questions, but he simply smiled. "You're a good man, Michael. Well, I won't bother you anymore. Thanks for the pie." When Edward left, Michael felt a wave of relief. He knew that the children's presence would soon attract more attention, which would only increase the risk of them being discovered. In the afternoon, Michael received a text message from Isabel. "We found evidence linking James. He's indeed the leader of a child trafficking ring. Be careful." Michael read the message, his anxiety intensifying. He glanced at the children, their innocent faces lit up as they played in the corner of the room. They were blissfully unaware of the danger lurking just outside. As the sun began to set, another car appeared in front of the bakery. Michael recognized James stepping out, this time accompanied by 2 other men, their demeanor suspicious. They stood outside the bakery, talking amongst themselves, before James walked in alone. Michael felt his heart pounding. He tried to maintain his composure as James approached the counter. "Hello, Michael," James said, his voice calm but chilling. "I stopped by today to ask more about the children I saw last time. I'm a bit curious." Michael clenched his fists, keeping his voice steady. "As I said, they're the children of a friend. They'll be picked up soon." James smirked, his eyes boring into Michael's. "I hope so. I just want to make sure nothing inappropriate is going on." When James finally left, Michael felt the tension suffocating him. He knew his time was running out. After James left, Michael stood behind the counter for a long time. Every word James had said cut into his mind like a knife. Make sure nothing inappropriate is going on, the words were nothing less than a veiled threat. Michael understood that James knew everything and wouldn't stop. He went upstairs to the small room where the children were playing with a few old toys he had found in storage. Lucy looked up at him, her eyes filled with worry. "Is he coming back, mister?" Michael sat down beside her, smiling gently to reassure her. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I won't let him do anything to you." "But he always finds us," Lucy whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "No matter how far we run, he always shows up." Michael felt a sharp pain in his chest at her words. He couldn't imagine what these children had endured. Stroking Lucy's hair, he said softly, "You don't have to be afraid anymore. I've called Isabel. She's the best police officer in town. She'll help us. Lucy nodded, but Michael could tell she wasn't completely comforted. He decided to call Isabel again, even though he knew she was busy. "This is Isabel," she answered, her voice slightly rushed. "Michael, is there something new?" "James stopped by the bakery again," Michael said quickly. "He's asking questions about the kids. I think he knows they're here." There was a brief silence on the other end before Isabel replied, her tone low and serious. "Michael, you need to be extremely careful. James isn't the kind of person who takes failure lightly. If necessary, he'll resort to violence." "I understand," Michael replied. "But I can't let him hurt them." "Listen," Isabel continued. "We're keeping a close eye on him, but we don't have enough evidence to arrest him yet. I'll increase police patrols around the bakery. But Michael, make sure the bakery is locked up tight at night, and if anything suspicious happens, call me immediately." Michael sighed. "Thanks, Isabel. I'll be careful." After hanging up, Michael felt a heavy weight pressing down on him. He knew Isabel was doing her best, but time wasn't on their side. James wouldn't wait long. That evening, Michael closed the bakery earlier than usual. He drew the curtains tightly over the windows and double-checked the locks. The children had finished their dinner and were sitting around a small table upstairs, where Michael had set up a lantern to create a cozy atmosphere. Lucy was quietly telling stories to her younger siblings, trying to distract them from their fear. Michael watched them for a while, silently admiring Lucy's strength. Despite being only about 5 years old, she acted like a true older sister, always protecting and comforting her siblings. A sudden knock on the door made Michael jump. He quickly went downstairs, his heart pounding. Peering through the curtain, he saw a man standing outside, bundled in a thick coat and wearing a woolen hat. Michael didn't recognize him, but the man's steady gaze felt both unfamiliar and oddly reassuring. "Michael. It's me, Thomas," the man called out. "I work at the lumber mill. Isabel sent me. She said you needed help." Michael opened the door cautiously, his eyes still wary. "Isabel sent you?" Thomas nodded, his expression earnest. "Yes. She said you're dealing with some trouble and could use someone to keep watch. I'll stay here overnight if you don't mind." Michael felt a small sense of relief. "Thank you, Thomas. It's good to have some extra help." Thomas stepped inside, removing his hat and coat. He was a man in his 50s, broad-shouldered and with a face that exuded determination. Michael felt safer knowing Thomas was there. "Isabel gave me a brief rundown of the situation. I'll stay down here to keep watch. If anything happens, just call me," Thomas said firmly. Michael nodded, grateful. "Thank you, Thomas. I really appreciate it." Late that night, as the bakery grew quiet, Michael lay on a small couch downstairs, unable to sleep. He listened to every sound, the wind howling through the cracks, the distant hum of passing cars. Every noise kept him on edge. Around midnight, Michael heard something outside. He bolted upright, his heart racing. Thomas was already awake, his eyes alert. "There's something out there," Thomas whispered. The two of them moved cautiously to the window, peering outside. A figure was moving around the bakery. Michael immediately recognized the silhouette. It was James. "Damn it," Michael hissed through clenched teeth. "He's here." Thomas motioned for Michael to stay quiet, pulling a metal rod from his coat. "Don't do anything reckless. Let me handle it if he tries to force his way in." James moved closer, his eyes scanning the windows. Michael felt his heart stop when James paused, staring directly at the front door. But instead of doing anything, James smirked faintly before turning and disappearing into the night. Thomas exhaled but kept his eyes fixed on the door. "He's testing us. Michael, you need to prepare yourself. He won't stop." Michael clenched his fists, his eyes filled with determination. I won't let him win. I promise. The next morning, weak sunlight filtered through the thick snow outside. Michael opened his eyes after a nearly sleepless night. Thomas was already awake, sitting by the window with a cup of hot coffee in hand, his eyes never leaving the street outside. He didn't come back last night, Thomas said quietly as Michael approached. But I'm certain he's still nearby. Michael nodded, the unease still heavy in his chest. Upstairs, the children were still asleep, but Lucy was the first to wake. She tiptoed down the stairs, her eyes darting around cautiously, ensuring everything was safe. Mr. Michael, Lucy called softly, her voice laced with worry. Is there anything I can do to help? I don't want to just sit around. Michael knelt down, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. You don't need to do anything, Lucy. Just stay with your siblings, watch over them, and listen to me. Can you do that? Lucy was silent for a moment before nodding. Okay, but if you need me, I'll help. Michael looked at her, admiring her courage. Despite her young age, Lucy understood the gravity of the situation, and that made Michael even more determined to protect them. By noon, as Michael was preparing pastries, a strong gust of wind suddenly blew the bakery door open. He turned to see James entering, this time accompanied by two other men. All three were dressed in black, their presence radiating danger. Good afternoon, Michael, James said, his voice calm but icy. Today, I'm here to have a serious talk. Michael straightened, his eyes unwavering. I don't think we have anything to discuss. James smirked, stepping closer to the counter. Michael, you're a smart man. I know the kids are here. And I think you know they belong to me. I don't know what you're talking about, Michael replied firmly. If you're not here to buy anything, I suggest you leave my bakery. One of James's men stepped forward, placing a hand on the counter and speaking in a threatening tone. Don't play the hero, Michael. It doesn't suit you. From the corner of the room, Thomas stepped forward, holding the metal rod firmly in his hand, his eyes locked on the three men. You're not welcome here. If you don't want trouble, you'd better leave now. James glanced at Thomas before turning back to Michael. You should think carefully, Michael. I'm giving you 1 day to hand over the kids. If you don't, he didn't finish his sentence, but the cold smile on his face was enough for Michael to understand his meaning. After James and his men left, Michael sighed, his hands trembling with anger. Thomas placed a hand on his shoulder. Michael, he's going to make his move. We need a plan. That night, Michael and Thomas sat at the table, meticulously planning how to protect the children. Isabel had promised to send additional patrols to the area, but Michael knew it wouldn't be enough. James wasn't the type to back down because of the police. We need to get the kids out of here, Thomas said, his tone grave. He won't attack if he's not sure they're here. Michael shook his head. But where would we take them? We can't keep running forever. Isabel might be able to arrange a safe place, Thomas suggested. We just need to buy some time until she can set it up. Michael nodded, his heart heavy with worry. He knew time wasn't on their side, and James could strike at any moment. Around midnight, Michael was jolted awake by an unusual sound. He sat up, peering out the window, and saw a car parked right in front of the bakery. 3 figures stepped out, all dressed in black. Thomas! Michael whispered urgently, waking the man who had dozed off in a chair. Thomas immediately sprang to his feet, his eyes sharp with alertness. They're here. The two moved quickly to the front door. Michael gripped the rod Thomas had given him earlier. I'll buy us time. You go upstairs and get Lucy and the kids ready. Thomas nodded and hurried up the stairs. Michael stood at the door, taking a deep breath before opening it. James stood there, his smirk even more sinister than before. Michael, I didn't think you'd be this foolish. I gave you a chance, and now I have to handle this myself. You're not coming in here, Michael said firmly. James chuckled coldly, signaling for his two men to step forward. I don't think you can stop us. Michael raised the rod, ready to fight. I've called the police. They'll be here any minute. James paused, his eyes narrowing with challenge. You're lying. But no matter. I'll teach you a lesson. One of James's men stepped forward, but before he could act, Thomas charged down the stairs, wielding a wooden chair. He struck the man hard, sending him sprawling. The other man drew a knife, but Michael quickly struck his hand, causing the blade to clatter to the floor. James stepped back, his expression furious. You'll pay for this, Michael. I promise. As the sound of police sirens echoed in the distance, James signaled his men to retreat. They scrambled into the car and disappeared into the night, leaving Michael and Thomas breathing heavily in the quiet aftermath. Michael glanced at Thomas, who was also exhausted but whose eyes were filled with determination. We can't let him come back. Don't worry, Thomas said, patting his shoulder. Isabel will have a plan soon. You did well, Michael. Michael nodded, but he knew this battle was far from over. The sound of police sirens echoed through the quiet night, breaking the tense silence that had enveloped the Dulce Esperanza bakery. James and his accomplices had fled, but the arrival of the police brought the first glimmer of hope to Michael and Thomas after days of anxiety. Isabel stepped out of the first car, her face reflecting intense focus. Michael, are you okay? Isabel asked, her eyes quickly scanning the disarrayed bakery after the confrontation. Did they leave? They just left when they heard the sirens, Michael replied, his voice still shaky. They know the kids are here, Isabel. If it weren't for Thomas, I don't know what would have happened. Isabel looked at Thomas and gave him a small nod. Thank you for helping, Thomas. We'll handle this soon. Thomas shrugged. It's nothing. But Isabel, James isn't someone to take lightly. He won't stop. You're right, Isabel agreed, her gaze sharp. But this time, we have enough evidence to act. She pulled a folder from the bag she carried, opened it, and handed it to Michael. We've been tracking James and his organization for a while. The symbols on the children's clothing were the key clue we needed. Michael stared at the photos and documents Isabel showed him. One picture of James standing beside other children in a dark warehouse sent chills down his spine. What did he do to these kids? Michael asked, his voice trembling. He's the leader of a cross-border child trafficking ring, Isabel said coldly. Children who are kidnapped or abandoned are often forced to work or sold to illegal buyers. But, Michael, thanks to you and these children, we now have a chance to dismantle his operation. So, what do we do now? Thomas asked, his eyes locking on Isabel. First, we'll move the kids to a safe location, Isabel said. The police have prepared a secure shelter where they'll be cared for and protected. At that moment, Lucy ran down the stairs, her face filled with fear. We don't want to go. We don't want to leave Mr. Michael. Michael knelt down and gently pulled Lucy into his arms. Lucy, you have to understand, this is the best way to keep you safe. The police will take care of you better than I can. No. I don't trust anyone but you, Lucy sobbed. I've seen people like them before. They lie. They don't help us. Michael felt his heart ache as if it were being squeezed. He looked at Isabel, his eyes pleading for help. Isabel sighed softly, then crouched down and spoke gently. Lucy, I understand how you feel. But I promise, we'll do everything we can to protect you. And you won't have to leave Mr. Michael if you don't want to. Lucy looked up at Isabel, her eyes still brimming with tears. You promise? I promise, Isabel said firmly. But I need you to trust me. Lucy was silent for a moment, then finally nodded. Okay, but Mr. Michael has to stay with us. Isabel turned to Michael, speaking softly. Michael, we can arrange for you to stay at the shelter with the kids for a few days, at least until we apprehend James. But you'll need to cooperate with us. Michael nodded without hesitation. I'll do whatever it takes to keep them safe. A few hours later, the children were moved to a small house on the outskirts of town, a secure location prepared by the police. The house was warm, with individual rooms and toys to help the children feel safe. Isabel and several other officers remained on site to ensure security. Once everything was settled, Michael sat down next to Lucy, who still clung to his hand tightly. See, Lucy. This place is great, isn't it? Lucy nodded but still looked worried. Mr. Michael, he won't find us here, will he? Michael smiled, trying to reassure her. No, sweetheart. The police are protecting us. No one can hurt you now. Meanwhile, Isabel stood in another room, discussing plans with Thomas. James knows we're protecting the children. He won't let this go easily, Isabel said. So what's our next move? Thomas asked. We've set up surveillance around the area. When James makes his move, we'll catch him in the act, Isabel said, her eyes filled with determination. Thomas nodded. Let's hope this works. Michael and those kids have been through enough. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Michael sat alone in the living room, staring out the window. Snow continued to fall, creating an oddly peaceful scene. But Michael knew this peace was only temporary. Isabel walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Michael, you've done an incredible job. Michael gave a faint smile, but his exhaustion was evident in his eyes. I just want the kids to be safe, Isabel. They've been through so much. And thanks to you, they have a chance to start over, Isabel said. I promise you, James will never harm them again. Michael nodded, feeling a small flicker of hope. Though the road ahead was still fraught with challenges, he knew he wouldn't have to face it alone. The next morning, the small house in the outskirts was bathed in the soft winter sunlight. Michael woke up early to prepare breakfast for the children. The smell of toasted bread and warm milk filled the air, bringing a rare sense of peace after the chaos of the past few days. Lucy was the first to wake up. She walked into the kitchen, keeping her habit of glancing out the window before saying anything. Michael crouched down, placing a hand on her shoulder. It's okay, Lucy. You can relax a little. This is a safe place. Lucy nodded, though a trace of caution lingered in her eyes. I just want to make sure. Michael smiled gently. Where are the other kids? I made toast for you all. They're still sleeping, Lucy replied before pulling out a chair and sitting at the table. She looked at Michael, hesitating as though she wanted to ask something but couldn't bring herself to. Michael noticed her hesitation. He sat down across from her, speaking softly, You can ask me anything, Lucy. Mr. Michael. Why are you helping us? Lucy asked, her big round eyes fixed on him. I didn't think anyone would take such risks to protect kids they don't even know. Her question made Michael pause for a moment. He smiled warmly, his eyes softening. Because I once promised my mother that I would help anyone in need. When I saw you all, I knew I couldn't turn away. You deserve to live in safety and love. Lucy was silent, but Michael could see a faint light in her eyes, as if a weight had been lifted from her heart. She nodded slightly and then ran upstairs to wake her siblings for breakfast. Meanwhile, Isabel was at the police station, leading a meeting with her team. On the table lay a map of the house where the children were being sheltered, along with plans for their protection. Isabel stood at the head of the room, her voice firm and resolute. James and his accomplices will definitely make a move in the next few days. We have enough evidence to arrest him, but our top priority is keeping Michael and the children safe until this is over. A young officer, Manuel, raised his hand. But how can we be sure he'll show himself? He seems very cautious. Isabel nodded. True, but he's been cornered. The children are the most critical evidence against him. If he doesn't get them back, he loses everything. That leaves him no choice. Manuel nodded, though his face still showed concern. Isabel looked around the room, her gaze sharp. Remember, our mission is not just to arrest James, but to ensure no one gets hurt, especially Michael and the children. The team responded in unison, their spirits high. At the shelter, the afternoon passed peacefully. The children played in the living room, their laughter filling the house. Michael sat beside Lucy, helping her piece together a jigsaw puzzle. For the first time, Michael saw Lucy smile, a genuine, radiant smile he hadn't seen since meeting her. "Mr. Michael, I wish we could stay here forever," Lucy said, her voice filled with hope. Michael paused for a moment, then smiled softly. "I wish that too, Lucy. But we have to face reality. The police will help you find an even safer place where you can start fresh." Lucy fell silent, as if deep in thought. "Mr. Michael. If I tell you a secret, will you promise to keep it?" "Of course, sweetheart. I'll never tell anyone unless you want me to," Michael assured her. Lucy took a deep breath, then whispered, "I know where James is hiding the other children." Michael's eyes widened, and for a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. "Are you sure, Lucy?" She nodded, her expression serious. "I remember clearly. It's a big warehouse near a river. I don't know exactly where, but I remember the smell of wood and the sound of running water. That's where he took us from." Michael clenched his fists, feeling a surge of anger rise within him. But he quickly composed himself. "Thank you for telling me, Lucy. I'll let Isabel know. This could help the police rescue the other children." Lucy looked at Michael, trust evident in her eyes. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Michael said, his voice filled with determination. When Isabel received the information from Michael, she immediately alerted the investigation team. Lucy's details were the most important lead they had, and Isabel knew they couldn't miss this opportunity. "I want my team ready in an hour," Isabel ordered. "We'll search every area near the river within a 10-kilometer radius. James won't escape this time." Manuel stepped forward, his voice tinged with concern. "What about Michael and the kids? If we leave them, will they be safe?" "I'll assign officers to stay behind and protect them," Isabel replied. "Michael has done an incredible job, but now it's time for us to act." She turned to her team, her eyes blazing with determination. "This time, we're ending this for good." Late that night, under the cover of darkness, Isabel and her team conducted a critical raid on the warehouse Lucy had described. Flashlights cut through the damp ground as footsteps echoed softly, drawing closer to their target. Inside the warehouse, James and his men were preparing to flee, unaware that the net was closing in around them. Team 1 approached the main entrance. Team 2, secure the back, Isabel commanded through the radio, her voice steady. "Make sure no one escapes." The sound of heavy boots reverberated as the police stormed the doors. James jerked in surprise, his eyes wide with panic. "Damn it! We've been found," he shouted, but it was too late. Officers swarmed in, surrounding the entire area. "James Vargas, you are under arrest for child trafficking," Isabel declared, her gun trained on him. "Drop your weapon and surrender immediately." James looked around, realizing he had no way out. He tried to resist, but the police subdued him in seconds. His accomplices were also apprehended, none escaping the grasp of the law. "Search the entire area," Isabel ordered, her eyes scanning every dark corner of the warehouse. A voice called out from inside, "There are children here." Isabel ran quickly toward the children, her heart sinking at the sight of more than a dozen frightened faces huddled together in the corner of the warehouse. "It's okay, children. I'm a police officer, and we're here to get you out of here," she said, her voice as gentle as possible. The children were led outside, where medical staff was waiting. Isabel looked at their innocent faces, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. Finally, they had done it. At the shelter, Michael and Thomas were staying up late. Neither could sleep, knowing Isabel and her team were undertaking such a dangerous mission. Lucy sat next to Michael, her small hand gripping his tightly. "Mr. Michael, do you think Ms. Isabel will catch him?" Lucy asked, her voice trembling. Michael leaned down, gently patting her head. "She's the best, Lucy. You have to trust her." Just then, Michael's phone vibrated. He quickly answered it. "Michael, it's Isabel," her voice came through, tired but filled with joy. "We've captured James. The children are safe." Michael exhaled deeply, relief flooding through him. "Thank you, Isabel. Thank you for everything." Lucy looked up, her eyes lighting up. "What did she say, Mr. Michael?" "James has been caught. We don't have to be afraid anymore, Lucy," Michael replied, his voice filled with emotion. The entire house seemed to brighten with the good news. The children hugged each other, some bursting into tears, but they were tears of joy and liberation. A few days later, Isabel visited the shelter. She brought small gifts for the children, including coloring books, toys, and new clothes. When she walked in, she saw Michael helping Lucy fold clothes while the three younger children played nearby. "Buenos dias." Isabel greeted, a bright smile on her face. "Buenos dias, Isabel." Michael replied, his face lighting up with happiness. "What did you bring this time?" "Just some gifts for the little ones," Isabel said, placing the bag on the table. "Michael, I also have more good news." Michael looked at Isabel, curious. "What is it?" Isabel sat down, her gaze soft as she looked at Lucy. "We've found your family." "But," she paused, watching Lucy for her reaction. Lucy suddenly went quiet, then looked up at Michael. "I don't want to leave you," she said. Isabel sighed softly. "Lucy, I understand how you feel. But your relatives love you very much and want to bring you home." Lucy turned to Michael, her eyes filling with tears. "Mr. Michael, do I have to go?" Michael knelt down, taking her hands in his. "Lucy, I want you to have a complete family. But no matter where you are, I'll always be here for you." Lucy didn't say anything, she just hugged Michael tightly. Finally, she whispered, "I'll never forget you, Mr. Michael." A few weeks later, James and his accomplices were brought to trial. Thanks to Isabel's solid evidence and the children's testimonies, James was sentenced to the harshest penalty. The child trafficking ring was officially dismantled. Michael returned to his usual life at the Dulce Esperanza bakery, but his heart carried scars that would never fade. He no longer saw Lucy and the others by his side, but his greatest joy was knowing they were safe and happy. Isabel often stopped by the bakery, bringing updates about the children. One day, she walked in with a large envelope. "Michael, this is a letter from Lucy." Michael opened it and read the scrawled handwriting of the little girl. "Dear Mr. Michael, I miss you very much. My new family is wonderful, but I'll never forget what you did for us. One day, I'll come back to visit you." Michael smiled as he folded the letter. "We did it, Isabel. We gave them a new chance at life." Isabel nodded, pride shining in her eyes. "Yes, we did. And it's all thanks to you, Michael." The Dulce Esperanza bakery returned to its peaceful routine, but now it carried a new meaning, a symbol of hope and compassion. Michael looked out the window at the snowflakes beginning to fall, his heart filled with warmth. This story reminds us that kindness and courage can create profound change. Michael didn't hesitate to protect innocent children, even when facing danger from a powerful criminal organization. His determination, combined with Isabel's efforts, proved that justice and unity could prevail. Most importantly, it underscores the belief that every child deserves to live in love and safety.
If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.